talking crime stats a short while ago. Let's talk to something quite closely related, which is, of course, the police force. The New South Institute, a public policy think tank that provides evidence-based policy and applied research on complex issues of government, launched the Function of Police report. According to the Institute, the report sets out what has been called a novel theoretical framework to understand the limits of South African police service and proposes a path of reform. We are now joined by New South Institute co-founder, director and author of the report, Ivor Chipkin. He joins us now via Zoom. A very good evening to you, sir. Thank you so very much for joining us here on SABC News.
Good evening. Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
Let's start here. I mean, the function of the police report. I mean, firstly, why, the need or importance to have this sort of report? Why is it necessary? Was there perhaps some sort of, ambiguity or confusion around what the functions of police are?
Yeah, and it's a great starting point. I think it's taken for granted what the function of the police are, especially in policy discussions or when you speak to everyday South Africans. The function of the police is to deal with crime. I think that's the answer one gets over and over again. And yet the argument that we're making in the report is that function is not straightforward, especially given that we don't think that is how the police themselves understand their role, especially at the leadership level. So what the report has argued is that our argument is that the function of the police is to be what a well-known criminologist once called partisan to citizens. In other words, responding to crime, but not only to crimes, dealing with what we call social emergencies, dealing with the kinds of things that you and I, everyday people in their day-to-day circumstances, are struggling with, wanting to be safe in their neighborhoods, walking around, safe in their homes, those sorts of things. Yeah. We argue that is what being partisan to citizens is about. Our argument is that is not what the police is focused on. So our argument is that the police has become preoccupied with political intrigue within the ruling party in particular, with managing contestation within a political elite. Essentially, it's become politicized, and it's lost its focus on everyday policing, on helping you and I live in more secure environments.
And how, Mr. Chipkin, did we get to that point where, what is such an essential service that, as you rightly say, is supposed to be, really for the service of the citizens, for the service of, the country, that we got to the point where and I'm going to use the word misusing, for lack of a better word, where we're sort of misusing the police for political issues. How exactly did we reach that particular point? Because one would think that there are, sort of checks and balances so that things like that don't actually happen.
No, I think misusing is a good word in this respect. I mean, I think if one thinks historically, this was very much the apartheid police. For the vast majority of South Africans, they were not involved in protecting individuals, ordinary people in their neighborhoods, in townships. That's not what the police were doing. That's not what their focus was on. They weren't preventing crime. They weren't dealing with crime. They weren't trying to make neighborhoods safer for black South Africans. Yeah. They were preoccupied with chasing down political activists and maintaining a repressive and violent system. So it's not so surprising when we think about the police not being focused on policing. We think that during the 1990s, there was a profound transition, and there were really, really promising movements in the direction of creating a police force, which for the first time truly in South Africa's history was focused on civilian questions, crime, making our neighborhoods safe. Some of the reports are that during the 1990s, for the first time in South African history, black South Africans could call the police, and there was some chance that the police would respond to their call for emergency. Yeah. We think that has shifted again. We've shifted back into a situation where the police are not focusing on you and I, are not focusing on dealing with everyday crime and with situations in our neighborhoods. And we think that starts around the politicization of the police, which starts in the 2000s and then accelerates during the period of state capture, where really the police's focus becomes turned away from you and I, from ordinary citizens, towards managing conflict in the ruling party.
And Mr. Chipkin, I mean, this then becomes very interesting. Yeah. Please do.
I mean, the argument is, this is the broad picture. Of course, there are all sorts of exceptions. There are thousands of policemen trying to do their jobs. This idea that all the police are sort of corrupt and incompetent is nonsense. There are thousands of police. There are many police stations which are really doing their job. So this is a broad picture. It loses some of the nuance.
Yeah.
But the broad picture is evidence in the big statistics. So if you look at police budgets over the last recent years, what you'll see is a huge decline in spending on everyday policing.
Yeah.
There are fewer policemen. There's less money going into the infrastructure of police stations, the buildings, the quality of the buildings. That's why the police stations look so dilapidated.
One of the things I wanted to talk about, just linking to what you're saying. We just spoke about the crime stats, and of course, every time that we talk about crime stats, it seems that there's been an increase in crime stats. And while you're talking, I'm thinking to myself, might this be the reason that we're faced with this particular situation where crime stats are increasing due to the fact that there's a neglect of sort of the police? Could one then link the two? Would it make sense to say that is indeed the causal link?
This is the argument that we make. We make that the rising crime statistics are almost certainly related to the fact that the police has become deflected away from dealing with everyday crime and with safety in our neighborhoods. So that's the argument we make. And if I can just add, if you look at the longer history of policing in South Africa, you see a remarkable change. During that period in the 1990s, when the police were starting to focus on crime and what we call social emergencies, you see something quite dramatic in the police statistics, in the crime statistics. They really start coming down. Some of that is related to the fact that the civil war in KZN comes to an end, and the civil war in Gauteng as well, and the general sort of violence related to the political transition is coming down. So some of that accounts for it. But there are genuine improvements in the safety of South African streets and neighborhoods. The murder rates are coming down, and they're coming down quite dramatically. It starts to shift around 2010. Crime starts rising again, and now we're at the level of crime, the level of murder, which we were in the early 2000s. Yeah. I think what explains this is not so much the capacity of the police and the competence of our police. All of that, of course, are hugely important factors. Even the legitimacy of the police, I think that's less important than it's the broad political orientation of the police. We've moved away from a focus on dealing with crime and with social emergencies, and that's where we need to start.
And I mean, how do we then turn, the situation around? And I'm glad we've got reports such as the one that you have authored that perhaps point to where, the red flags are. But moving on from, these sort of reports and the crime stats that are released, how do we become, more effective? How do they become more effective on the ground, the implementation of making sure that, we deal with what most South Africans are worried about, which is, the issue of crime? Because if the police have so many limitations, then clearly, as you've said, this then points to the issue of high crime.
I'm a little bit more optimistic than that. I mean, there are clearly huge logistical and professional challenges in the police, but I'm not sure that that's where the problem lies primarily. So I'm quite encouraged by the idea that if we depoliticize the leadership of the police, so let's take away the power of the president to appoint the commissioner of the police, for example. Let the commissioner of the police be selected internally through a professional and transparent process. Let the generals, the senior generals in the police, let them not be political appointments. Let the minister not be enabled, not be allowed to be involved in operational decisions around police strategy and how the police function. Let that become professional policing role. Let criminologists, let policy think tanks, let us inform those processes. Let's professionalize the leadership of the police. I think that's the point to start. And then hopefully that will translate into the appropriate redirection of police resources into police stations, for example, station commissioners, infrastructure on police stations, into the vehicles and the equipment that police need in order to do their jobs. So I'm more optimistic that is the change that's required. And strangely enough, that particular change is easier to accomplish than a kind of cultural revolution within the police itself, or a retraining of all policemen.
Yeah.
I'm more optimistic that what is possible is a depoliticization of the police, which could happen fairly quickly and quite easily as the way forward.
Mr. Chipkin, I appreciate your insightful inputs here. We certainly do appreciate it here on SABC News. Thanks very much, sir.